Well, good day. Here we are on St. Patrick's Day in the home of Paul and Tat Reistrup in suburban Washington. And we're going to be talking to Paul about his long and varied career in the railroad business. And why don't we start at the beginning in 1932 in Sioux City, Iowa. You were born as the son of someone who was perfectly positioned to give you a career in railroading. Your dad was a professor and music professor at the university there in town. Why don't you take us through your childhood up to your appointment to West Point, and then we'll move on from there.
Well, Dad was very supportive, and he was, of course, with my brother later, who was 4 years younger. And that really is my first real interest in railroads was when John was expected, actually being born in the hospital. You know, my brother was expected any minute, and Dad had a brilliant idea to take me to the roundhouse. And being Danish, he had conversed with me in nothing but Danish until I was 11 years old. And he was fluent in German. He got a advanced degree there in Germany in music theory. And so he could talk, and we had a lot of German, Scandinavian around the roundhouse. And he also knew French, but I don't ever remember of French around Sioux City at all. The diversion was wonderful for me. There ended up being a rail enthusiast ever since. Sioux City had 7 different railroads, including the Sioux City Terminal, which was owned by the Stockyards Company. It switched to Stockyards. They had awful looking slope back tender switchers that looked like, because they had black smoke, they must have been burning dirt. And I never forget that. And some of those railroads have merged since. We had the Q, the Burlington, came across the rickety bridge with 2 Pacifics that had Alesco feedwater heaters. They had one on the head end of the train and one at the rear because of the bridge restriction.
Weight restriction.
Weight restriction. And it was fun to watch them struggle up, to get up that hill. They interchanged with the Great Northern, which right downtown. So that later became Burlington Northern, now Burlington Northern Santa Fe. We had the Milwaukee Road, which never merged with anybody through there, through Sioux City. And that one had the Hiawathas, and they were the ones I really liked to watch, and the Arrow. Often went down to see the Arrow at about, I think it was probably my bedtime. So after dinner, train, and then bed. And the Arrow would have wonderful Pacific steam locomotives, all spit shined. You could shave in the tender. They were that great. In contrast to Chicago and Northwestern and the Omaha, officially that's the Chicago, Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Omaha, always known as the Omaha. And they looked like they had painted their locomotives with a broom. But they had a wonderful roundhouse, complete circle, and had 2 entryways, exit entry, exit. And I remember them going down and blowing off the boiler. They had big things alongside the track so that it would catch and sort of reduce the sound, and so it didn't kill somebody with this, getting the foam off the boiler. So that was all that was really fun. Dad used to take us down at that time of night to that railroad also, and watch the big freight train. And they had, we called them bell fronts. And I later found out, I had no idea, that they were USRA heavy Mikados. And they would pull everything in town plus a caboose and leave for the Twin Cities, about 400 miles. So you can tell why I was interested in the railroad. We also watched them switch the car.
So did you develop, obviously, your interest in railroading at that age, but then after high school you go to the West Point. Was it your intent to eventually end up in the railroad business, or did you think you'd have a career in the military, or how did that run through your mind?
No, had never really thought about a career in railroading, just an interest. And I was interested in school, particularly technical stuff, chemistry, and geometry, trigonometry, all of that. And, you know, did really well. I think I was second in the class. I believe that's what do you call it, valedictorian or something. But anyway, and I was being sought by, and you know, really didn't understand, except I was honored, pleased. The FBI came to interview at our house, knock on the door, and what they wanted to do was talk to me and, you know, size up the family. But they wanted to hire me. And so it ended up that I had a number of scholarships offered. Harvard, Yale, all of those Ivy League, Princeton, and Rensselaer Institute, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And I think I had 4 full scholarships. But I was intrigued with the military because of my scouting. I became an Eagle Scout and was junior assistant scoutmaster. That's a helper for the scoutmaster. And so that was really the military thrust. That led to my being appointed because the Congressman Charles B. Hooven from Alton, Iowa, he thought I would be the one for his. He had one principal appointment a year, so I got the principal and off to West Point. And that was kind of fun because I rode out of town on the Hiawatha behind steam and got to ride in that rear car. You know, I was sloped back observation.
With the big fin in the back?
No, ours did not have the fin.
No?
Because ours was hand-me-down. It was from the very first train. It was just a pure slope back. And the cars were of the first, I guess, 1935. And rode beautifully, though. I always at Amtrak wished that our equipment rode as smoothly as the Milwaukee. I even told them that you ought to go, get some of those trucks. So I ended up I rode behind a Niagara with the elephant ears. Remember that? I remember being paced by a nickel plate, parallel main line, and I think it was gaining on us. This is a freight train with 284, beautiful. Then I got to Albany, New York, and changed trains, and actually arrived at West Point behind steam. Have a photo of that at Albany during the train change. Arrived at West Point by steam on the West Shore. Now the West Shore, the complete circle, is owned by CSX, and they use that for their hotshot intermodal train.
Right.
And at that time, it was pretty rickety. So that's West Point, and I had really a wonderful time there.
Well, you said last night you got through it all with only one demerit, which is an achievement seldom reached by very many, and that's pretty remarkable. And so when you came out, did they ask you where you wanted to go, what kind of assignment you wanted?
Well, the routine was that you could choose by your grade standing. And so most of the, we called them hives. The guys really had high grades. And they would choose Corps of Engineers. And, so I chose artillery because I really enjoyed, the big weapons. We went to a lot of training, and I was really intrigued with the missiles. I saw some of the very early guided missiles, and ended up in air defense. My MOS, military occupational specialty, was guided missile unit commander. And I did command it during absences, but I was executive officer. And in the artillery, the executive officer fires the battery, both with guns and with missiles. And so we had a captain who had been infantry, and they were reducing force. They called him, he was rift from the infantry. So he ended up our leader. He couldn't even fire the battery. We had, when we got checked, there would be unannounced operational checks by majors. And they would ask him to get out of the chair, command chair. I took over. We also shot our missiles down in one. We did one a year. We took our own missile with us for some reason, and to White Sands. It was called Red Canyon Range Camp, and we got rid of this missile, which had been leaking. It's a whole other story. They had compressed air in them. They also, the fuel was JP4, jet fuel. But the oxygen was supplied by acid. So sometimes we had leaking acid. Well, this thing, we wanted to get rid of it, and so we volunteered it to shoot down this, they called it a RCAT, radio controlled air target. And, but now they have these drone things. So we also watched actually shooting down retired B-17s. And I stood at the end of the runway one time. That was exciting. And the captain had a box with toggles on it. And he was controlling this B-17, and it landed right over my head. You know, one wheel, the left wheel, and down, and those were tail draggers. They didn't have the tricycle landing gear. And it came down, settled down. That was exciting. So I really enjoyed the military. However, the promotions were very slow. It was I was in during Korea. I entered before Korea began, and I graduated after it ended. So they called it Korean Prep. And the reason that I got out was a little slow promotion. I'd never probably still be I don't know what, but anyway, that's why. And I was intrigued with because of my interest in railroads, with the Baltimore and Ohio training program. Well, I had several job offers because I was looking around. Junior engineer with the Pennsylvania. I had one with the Southern Railway. They called it a management training program. And then Downing Jenks offered me somewhere in Missouri. I don't remember the name, as a assistant train master, I think. But all of those very nice. So I decided to just do the B&O.
But you
because
also,
of the training program.
You'd also considered going into the aircraft business, correct?
Yes, yeah, but my eyes weren't good enough. And then when I left the Army, I thought about going with there were two, the missiles, and Western Electric did the radars. I thought about going with it. And they actually were seeking me, being, let's call a very senior first lieutenant. So I've had lots of opportunities and able to select the one I wanted.
So of all of the railroads you interviewed with, the B&O was probably the weakest financially of them. And what
needed us the most. That's why they did the training program. And it's fascinating they were ancient senior management. The first thing the wonderful man Jervis Langdon did, and he had a military background. He was Secretary of the Navy for a while, and I was very briefly Assistant Secretary of Defense. But he, was really a wonderful mentor, and he called us, the young guys, boy, and he gave us all opportunities, and a lot of them did very well. Graham ended up at, again to circle, at Amtrak 13 years, the president.
No, you're talking about Graham Clayton,
Graham
not,
Clayton.
not Jervis.
No, we're jumping ahead. No, Jervis went on to the Rock Island.
From the frying pan into the fire?
Yeah, C&O took over. I think that's really why Jervis left. And it was sort of, an odd thing. There was a lot of, on the B&O Shriners. In fact, they wore the fez, the locomotive, and it had to be a Shriner locomotive engineer on the Shrine Special. We ran, one after the other to the conventions. And they always have a train running around, too, the Shriners do at their conventions on the street. The anyway, I saw the guy in the locomotive cab, of E8, I guess, with his fez on. It was hard to believe.
Yeah.
But the C&O were Catholics. We had Gregory Divine, you know, the great white father. He was a wonderful man. They all, and the nice thing about C&O is that they owned the Greenbrier. And so we had to go to the Greenbrier. Tat and I counted 13 times because we go to meetings and
Right.
all sorts of stuff.
So
But they were money people also. They started, fascinating, the C&O, Big John Cusick, who was another wonderful man, finance guy, worked for Hayes Watkins, who you interviewed, was treasurer. So he coined the money, and Cusick was basically in charge of the finances.
And Hayes has some very interesting stories to tell about his experience with him. He also said that the reason Jervis left, or one of them, was that Jervis had wanted to do a coal rate reduction program on the B&O, and the C&O would have none of that, and he was frustrated by the fact that he wasn't able to put that program in place.
Yeah, that had a lot, maybe the key thing. They wanted, they did not like this idea of unit trains. On the B&O, we had gone to solid trains, and some of the first, and the coal cars, we called them, but the hoppers had a gold stripe or a yellow stripe down the side. Those cars went on the unit train. The rest of them could go anywhere. And so that was part of the rate reduction. The idea was to run solid trains and give them an incentive to do that, to load the train.
Right.
And but the C&O wanted all single cars and huge high rates. And they were running solid trains of coal, but it was solid train of single cars.
Right.
Absolutely amazing.
So when you joined the B&O, I don't know what year that would have been, in the 55, around there?
In 57.
57.
Yeah.
Did you go right into the training program, or did you have some jobs before?
No, I went right in,
Okay.
and then I had the jobs afterward. The way the training program worked was, it spent a year visiting every department and being mentored by them.
So you have a 2-year program. How many other people were in the training program, do you remember?
Groups of 4. So
Oh,
I
okay.
had 3 others, and then they would have different groups. And and the idea was every department, and then the second year, it was sort of specializing.
Picking an area that you wanted to focus on.
So I picked a combination of 6 months of engineering track, because it's a railroad to start with the track, and then this second half engineering operations, train operations. So, and then we would be assigned. We went, upon ending that program, went out to Grafton, West Virginia, and as assistant division engineer.
So you get married, though, while you're in the training program?
No, after. 58, 1 year after that. So by then, Tat's joining me on these junkets. We get assigned.
Your first merger experience,
Right.
the 2 of you.
Right. Yeah. And, but you really need to know, I've got this rail behind me, but they sent me from Grafton up on the mountain, not our division, because they couldn't keep the trains on the track. and especially high car 96, with the cars rocking. In fact, they detoured that train around through Toledo or so because we couldn't keep it on the track. So I was assigned to that mountain to fix it. And
Is this west of Grafton?
east.
East of Grafton.
Yeah, that's where the coal went after the coal mine, Grafton, assembly into trade, and
Okay.
up the mountain. There was a horrible curve, 12-degree curve, Hiora, I remember, Hiora curve. And I noticed rust running down the base of the rail. And you can see the base on the rail behind me. Got down, I was in good shape, did sort of a push-up to look at the underneath there, and I saw a crack. I saw daylight through the base or the web of the rail. And I always carried 3x5 cards because the little notebook, the papers would fly around, and when it was sleeting, sleet got between the pages, the pencil would poke a hole in it. I still have a notebook that's got holes in it. So I went to 3x5 cards, but I shoved one of my cards through that rail. And they had said the division engineer at Cumberland, that was not my division. He said, we can't afford to replace that rail. I told him they had to replace the rail. It's the days before welded rail. They had all of these, and this stuff was, a lot of it 4-hole angle bars instead of 6. And but anyway, the rail was lying there. They knew they had to replace it. The ICC had ordered that the B&O replace all excessively worn rail on passenger main lines. That's before the FRA. And the rail was there, so I just put it in. And but I never got fired for it. I think they. Another interesting thing was, I'd come across a little pamphlet for the Milwaukee Road, string-lining curves. It was a way of measuring curves and smoothing. I call it smoothing. And before then, it was all done by eye, by the track foreman. But and by golly, that worked. So the inspection car, Clarence Jackman was the chief. I had to ride with him. You know, here we go down the mountain. And he said, quote, "I wish all of our railroad rode like this." It was nice. I agree. Of course, it's a little better in an office car. But some office cars for chief engineers rode rough. They wanted it to ride rough so the chief could bawl out the engineer. But anyway, so I immediately went from Grafton, where a dark, dreary house with Tat, and by then we had one baby, and to Akron, Ohio. We lived in Cuyahoga Falls. So I went from mountain slow speed to high speed passenger.
Still in engineering?
Still in engine, on the track. I was assistant division engineer of the Akron division.
Okay. Yeah. And how were the people that you were working for, the division engineers? Were they helpful, mentoring, or were they cranky like the guy who said, we're not going to replace it,
Well, that cranky guy, I think eventually they got rid of. So when I was getting to that, Jervis reduced the retirement age. And he started reducing it at 70. Anybody over 70 out. And that got rid of, like, the operating vice president. You had these people Now, one of them that was retired like that went back running as a locomotive engineer.
Kept his seniority. And
Kept his seniority, so he could still work, but it was an early retirement. It was the beginning of this. Instead of just you're fired, and then there was
so 70s early retirement.
Yeah, 70s was early retirement. Eventually, that went down to, I think, to 55. You had to be at least 55 to be early retired.
I think there was a formula, it was 85, right? 55 and 30 years service, and you could get out.
Yeah.
So
But anyway,
so when did you transition from engineering into operations as train master? How did that happen?
Yeah, I was in this assistant division engineer at Akron. The general manager, C.T. Williams, I think his first name was Chester, sort of became a godfather of my next career. And he probably was watching me. He asked me one time at Akron what I wanted to do. And I said, well, I would like to get some terminal experience before I go too far in. I didn't say up the ladder, but before too long. Well, he said, quote, well, I'll make you a general yard master, damn it. And you can imagine. So I ended up general yard master at Painesville, Ohio, called Fairport Harbor, a coal loading facility for Lake Erie.
So yard masters were non-agreement employees on the B&O?
General yard master was a non-agreement. I had yard masters working for me, so
they were
union.
Okay.
I was the only non-union person in the town. The agent was union, so everybody else. And but I had that was a 1,000-car yard, and they had different grades of coal. So you'd have 10 of this, 20 of that. And I remember, and they had names.
Yeah.
Damon, and so forth. And one time there was a load, and they said 1 elk. So I went out there, because I couldn't believe it. And it was supposed to be in the middle of this boat. And lake carrier, but they called them boats, lake boats. And I went out there, and the ladders went up to the top of the car in those days. Now they're cut off for safety. Can't go up that high. But anyway, I climbed all the way up and looked at this thing. It looked like, just awful stuff. It looked soot. So now I know what they were doing. They're hiding this in the shipload. Today, they blend this stuff in train loads, and it's all tested, of course. There was testing going on in that yard. A guy with a shovel, little shovel, and a gunny sack would poke in the coal. So I think they knew what they were buying. A lot of our coal went to Canada, Ontario Hydro. I know it was a big customer, and others over there. So that was quite an experience.
Do you remember how many? I know on the N&W at Norfolk we had, I think we could handle 14,000 cars of coal at Lambert's Point, if my memory serves, and we had 150 or so different classes of coal, and they were named.
Yeah,
I think
like
after the miners' daughters, Mary Lou and Susie Q and whatever. And that was.
I recall we had probably 20, 25, not as many, because this is mainly steam coal.
Yeah, and it's on the lake.
Yeah, on the export coal, they were more picky because it was going for metallurgical,
right,
including Japan.
Yeah. Yeah, we had a lot going to Japan then.
Yeah, Europe and Japan. But anyway, I went on as general yardmaster, and C.T. Williams came to check on me. And I think what he really wanted to do was visit. He had a liking for the clerk in the car shop. So he's visiting around. And my superintendent was there, pawing the cinders. He was really antsy. And he said, "How you doing?" Just like that. And I said, "Well, Mr. Williams, I'm trying some things, and some of them work and some of them don't," just like that. And he said, "Well, keep trying, damn it," and turned his heel and went back to the car shop. So the next day I said, "Everybody, when you knew you were going to be promoted, when they said, go to the doctor, company doctor." So I had to go to the company doctor, I think in Pittsburgh. And then immediately with Tad, trainmaster, full trainmaster, jumped over assistant terminal I never was a terminal trainmaster, just a general yardmaster. But so they were straight to road trainmaster at Pittsburgh, and mountains in every direction, including to Wheeling. That was really, with helper engines. Some of them, I think we were limited to 3 behind the caboose because it would shove the caboose off the track.
So you didn't put, some places they put the caboose behind the helpers. You didn't do that?
No, we didn't do that. They had concrete in the bottom. Even the wooden cabooses had steel frame. Yeah, so I've seen them do that, put the caboose behind. But the trainmaster job was the best one, and there's my hat, which you can look at later. It's still got soot on it.
Everyone needed a hat.
A full trainmaster, yeah. If you didn't, you were a hatless wonder. And
well, this is at the time when I guess it was JFK when he became president that he didn't wear a hat, and that kind of got rid of men wearing hats as a routine dress article.
Yes, true. But on the railroading, I think it stayed for.
Well, railroading never was leading edge and things like that.
The quote is, "You're not an official, comma, you don't have a hat on."
Right.
And that was your badge of authority.
So you're in Pittsburgh for how long before you go to Baltimore?
Well, it was a step in there, but because we were there more than 2 years. But we were then assigned to what was called a development committee. It was like an efficiency committee, and we went around the railroad, and most of the time the thing had already been cleaned up, made more efficient before we got there. Because one of the guys told me, superintendent, "You don't think that I was going to let you find all this." So
right.
They got rid of these extra people. There were clerks everywhere. And what we focused on was people who could run the trains and do the work, track and mechanical, even there you had excess. They had huge offices. What do you need an office for?
Not supposed to be in the office.
Supposed to be working on the locomotive.
Yeah.
So that led about that time to my being promoted to superintendent of car utilization and distribution. They had the utilization first because of efficiency. But I always said it was under the ICC, equitable distribution of dissatisfaction. So everybody, we had things like mine ratings. if a coal mine, was very efficient, they got a high rating, they could get 100 cars. And the lesser ones would get 5 cars.
Were you short on cars?
Yes.
Most of the
and
time.
we were so that's why they were being distributed by equitably.
Yeah, right. Right.
But that was being regulated and being checked. People could complain to the ICC. I went from part of that job was to distribute passenger cars and include everything. We had the Pullman company ran the sleeping car, but we distributed everything else. In baggage cars, express cars, we had coaches, and the diners.
But didn't you have fairly fixed consists on the passenger trains? It's going to be 5 coaches, a diner, and a parlor car.
Yeah, it starts out fixed.
Yeah.
But then you've got holidays, pre-Christmas Eve.
Yeah. Football specials.
And all these specials, Shriner specials.
Right.
And so we were, and where are you going to get the car? And we tried to have the better coaches, we could tell them where to put them on the train for the longer haul passengers. Conductors didn't like this. They wanted to do it their way. But we wanted it, so finally I made them put a gold stripe under the number of the refurbished, the better coaches. And the other one would be up front for the, the shorts, we called them.
Yeah.
We ride 50 miles, something like that.
Right.
But if you're riding all the way from Baltimore, Chicago, you were in a good coach. And then we had, of course, the dining cars. They would pretty much be assigned to the train by but we had to make sure they got shopped. They had to go to the shop at the regular intervals.
Did you, I know at one point you said that the maintenance on the passenger cars was not up to where I'm probably getting a little ahead here, but up to where you thought it was. So you probably had more spares in the fleet than you might have had if everything were maintained properly.
Yes, and we used those things, spares, some of them pretty worn, with seats that flopped over.
Walk-over seats.
You couldn't use that, in my opinion, for a long haul passenger.
Right.
Put that up there where they smoked, because at that time they could still smoke. And on race trains. We put that stuff on race trains. The Shriner Special, we gave them pretty good cars, but that's what I was doing. And that really led, I think, to the Amtrak thing, because I was really running the distribution of all of the passenger equipment. And Jervis put me in charge of the whole department.
Yeah, so that's a major step in a different direction for a career railroader to get out of the freight business and into passenger business, which was pretty much nosediving everywhere and bleeding red ink. And here's this great opportunity for you to step into the fire pit.
Well, Jervis and I talked about that. As I said, I really wanted to go on in the freight business, especially coal, because that was making money. And he said, well, we'll make it 18 months. And he said, you have 18 months to make it break even, or we'll get rid of it, meaning passenger. And so we tried everything. We tried we even got in-flight motion pictures to put movies on the train. We had a movie for first class in the dining car, and the coach, there was a movie coach, and that was special. I don't remember the seats were reserved, but I don't remember it was special, more money. Maybe they had to buy a movie ticket. I don't know. I didn't do that. Anyway, the passenger department, Jervis had me form everybody who was involved in passenger, including mail. We had a guy for express. I chose a wonderful guy, Jim Sell, from the operating department to be operations, director of passenger operation. He later became a general manager on the freight. And then I had Dave Watts, one of his marketing, stole him from the industrial engineering department. Bill Dixon's think tank was a source of a lot of bright people. But anyway, and that kind of irritated John Cusick. He didn't want this talent like that going in. He said, "You're pumping air up a dead horse." That's what he told me. In that Slavic accent, "You're pumping air up a dead horse." But I said, "Mr. Cusick, I'll get rid of passengers faster my way than they did on the Southern Pacific by trying to drive them away."
Right.
And what we did was try to do the best job possible and keep the service good until the end. And we developed a 5-year plan, getting rid of secondary trains like the Diplomat, and then boiling it to getting rid of the overnight train, Detroit to Cincinnati. Why do you want to get in a sleeping car to go that far? So we made that a nice day train called the Cincinnatian, and so it was the route, and it worked. We were able to discontinue this stuff really because we were doing so much for the passengers. They really couldn't say much about trying to reduce the cost.
Right. So when you got in the passenger department, you had 100 and some odd people in there, and probably not the sharpest knives in the drawer across the board. How did you deal with talent and getting better people and removing the ones that were just sort of dead wood?
That's where the early retirement came in. We had it by then. If you were 55 years old and you had a no blemishes on your record, in other words, it wasn't disciplinary, you would be early retired. So I early retired really the whole upper management. But it really was, there was one guy who was sort of snively about it, but he didn't realize he was getting a good deal instead of being fired. He should have been fired. But one of them, I remember his name was Ed Ricks, took it so well they invited Tat and me to dinner at their house. So no offense, he understood. But they had, all of these people, some of them, they had double desks, big oaken desks, and they were sitting across from each other. I broke that up. If you need a desk, it goes one way. You don't need two people on a desk. It's interesting how inefficient it was.
And you'd get out and ride the trains, right?
Yeah, I rode unannounced. And now that's sort of interesting because as we went by another train, like number 1 and 2 would meet out there in the wilderness, the dining car crew would wave a white napkin in the window. And that was to indicate that I was on the train. They didn't communicate it, they just, then the other train knew, that I was out there because I did be riding back. I did begin to fly to places. and then get on the train.
So how did they know
totally
you were
in and out.
How did they know you were on board? Because it's not like today where everything is text messaging and
No, waving these.
No, right. But if you got on a train unannounced, how'd they know it was you? Right? Not everybody would recognize you.
No, but I had to show my pass.
Oh.
Yeah, because I.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you didn't buy a ticket to go really undercover?
No, I'm not really undercover. Never bought a ticket.
Yeah.
But I did go up to, is it Port Huron or something like that? Got on a train. That surprised him. Up there at the beginning of the run, rather than at the very wrong end where they were all sleepy-eyed. Yeah, I got on that one. So, but back to Amtrak, doing that unannounced stuff, there were 14 crews on the train from San Diego, LA, San Francisco, all the way up to Seattle. And one of them was bad. And I knew it because we were getting
The whole crew was
complaints.
bad.
Yeah, the whole crew was bad. So, and I was trying to, and I finally was able to figure out which one it was. And got on that one and we straightened that one out. But, I went to the management. It's their job. I'm at the headquarters. You're the one who's supposed to take care of these people.
Right.
But we don't want any complaints. From why in the world should anybody have to complain riding on a passenger train?
Right, right. So it wasn't very long after you took the passenger job that Langdon left for the Rock Island, and here you are out on your desert island all alone.
Yeah.
And was the new president, who was, I forget who it was, Toohey?
Yeah. Oh, he was wonderful.
So he was supportive of
yeah.
what you were doing?
Walter J. Toohey. And we loved him.
Oh, okay.
And he was president. He died on the threshold of the boardroom when they were merging. It was CNO was trying to merge with NNW at
Right,
the time.
yeah.
And he had died at the threshold. I was there that day, but we loved him, all of us. He was wonderful.
So you didn't feel
then
like
he was succeeded by Gregory Devine.
Okay. And how was he in terms of supporting what you were trying to do?
He was very supportive because he knew we were doing it the right way.
Okay.
Better service and then trim it down. Yeah, he was a coal guy. He and Hayes Watkins worked out together. They started with the dividend. I was going to get to that earlier. They started with a $4 dividend. CNO paid year after year and backed up. That's how you did the budget. They didn't do the budget and then it's not backward. But I think that's pretty good discipline.
That's clever.
Yeah.
Certainly different.
It was like a guaranteed
Yeah.
dividend, but it wasn't, that was regular, common stock, not preferred.
So at one point you go from director of passenger service into the coal department. How did that happen? What transpired there?
Yeah, well, I asked for it. They didn't want to lose me, and I asked to go into it.
So, you didn't want to stay in the passenger side?
It's a dead end.
Yeah, okay. So you were ready to move on.
Yeah, but then it got stolen because of the passenger, let's call it accomplishments, getting rid of this deficit, and to the Illinois Central. They basically stole me. But I made a deal there, that I was 2 years and out.
And was the mission at the IC similar? It was come in and fix this and do the best we can with it.
Right.
And they had some very well-known passenger trains.
And we actually did some improvement. We bought equipment used like dome cars. They never, why do you have a dome car on the city of New Orleans? Well, we had it. You know, we put it on. People loved it.
Sure.
And but we were able to we got rid of the secondary trains, and that led to really sort of a funny story. One of those discontinuance hearings was down in Haleyville, Alabama. That's near Birmingham. And I'm down there, and one of the protesters of the discontinuance, it's a train 3 and 4 named the Seminole that went to Florida also. Interline with the Central of Georgia and one of the Miami railroads. But at any rate, there was a deceased there, and it charged 2 first-class fares to ship a casket. But they had the funeral service in Haleyville, but half the family had moved to Chicago. And instead of bringing all the family down to Haleyville, they shipped
the casket
this
to Chicago.
It's a true story, back to Chicago. And they had a memorial service with body. And then they had to ship it back for burial. And so I call that a round trip ticket to heaven. That's true. I was there. And one of the bereaved, not more than one bereaved could go free. If you had 2 first-class fares, and some the bereaved could one ride in the train. But anyway, I think that's really something.
It is.
Round trip ticket to heaven.
Or at least you hope to have it.
Yeah.
I wanted to back up because you did a study on the passenger equipment. I think there were 550 cars in the fleet, and you said we've got 200 cars too many. How did that go over with the other parties involved, like mechanical and operations? How did you deal with that? Because obviously you can't both be right.
Yeah. Well, I didn't get on so well with the mechanical people because they knew everything.
Yeah.
I even had that trouble at Amtrak. We inherited one of those guys. I call him my red-throated friend because he gets red in the neck. And he said, well, you're going to do it. Yeah, because I was in charge.
Yeah.
And they knew that not to fool with me. I think that's helped with the military stuff. You don't have to, the sergeants knew. And they looked like one of them said one time, if I were you, Lieutenant, sir, this way, I'd do this. It's a good idea, sir. They run the Army, the sergeants, like yard masters run the railroad. But that mechanical bunch, they were really, and they weren't doing a good job.
So what was it they didn't want to do? They didn't want to reduce the fleet? You would think they would.
That's right, because they needed more people. More people.
They wanted the jobs.
Yeah, it was sort of, I figured out one time is one person you could get rid of per unit.
Yeah.
Per locomotive, per car.
Yeah.
Pretty much. Because you don't need all of this stuff.
So 300.
You don't need to have 4 diners. You can get around with 3.
So 300 cars out of the fleet is 300 people off the payroll. So
Yeah.
that was the source of the resistance.
Yep, yeah, definitely. And they knew it.
Yeah. But you'd think the chief mechanical officer would be wanting to run a more efficient operation.
Well, it's like a club.
Yeah.
They were a whole different bunch.
So one of the things I wanted to touch on was the cultural differences that you experienced. Obviously, the Army is one set of the way people relate. The B&O is another, and the IC is another, and then, of course, Amtrak. And I think maybe since you've experienced all those, you could kind of take us through how you viewed those cultures and how they changed over time.
Yes, they're really very, very different. The B&O were really very hardworking, disciplined, They had to almost bankrupt the, but the C&O was different because they coined money with that coal going downhill to export. At what one of my friends said, huge high rates.
Yeah.
Single cars. And then, of course, the culture at Illinois Central, a flatland railroad, which was a mixture of grain hauling. They did have coal, but that was that Midwestern high sulfur stuff. But it was more a high-speed merchandise. And that led to the intermodal thing, because piggyback, those were truck trailers on flat cars, circus loaded. You backed up a ramp. So very inefficient.
So when you got there, it was all circus loading.
All circus loading. You had to think about this. You had to have the trailer aimed the right way so that it could go to a ramp, so that the truck could get to it to get the trailer off of it. So that's what led to the top lift. I think we did one of the very first. We made a terminal called IMX, and that's intermodal and then express. And that was in the Chicago produce terminal. Produce had died out, old refrigerator cars, there's one right down here, with ice and all that. We converted that to an intermodal terminal, which I think is still there. It's along the interstate highway. Important to have that. And we went to Memphis, and we had enough room in the yard to put a nice, and then we had one at Jackson, Mississippi, and of course New Orleans. And that was the second largest port in the country in tonnage, but it hadn't been merchandise.
So how did you?
Anyway, IC was more a high-speed grain and merchandise railroad.
So when you end your passenger stint at IC, did they say, here's what we have for you, or did you say, I want to go into intermodal? How did you end up there?
It was the reverse. It's an interesting question, because Bill Johnson approached me, and I said, I don't want to go on in the passenger business. I'm trying to get out of it. And he said, well, 2 years, and if you get it, you fix it, I'll get you out. And that's when later, and we were good to his word, 2 years are up, called Buzz. He had a buzzer, and you went up 4 feet in your seat when that rang. And he said, you know, what would you like to do? And so I said, I'd really like to convert this piggyback thing, get rid of that name. In fact, they had a pig on some of our trailers.
Right. Sure, remember.
It looked like a high-speed pig on roller skates,
yeah,
I think it was. And to call it intermodal. And he said, I want to be vice president intermodal. And he said, you really want to call yourself that? As if it had something to do with sex, you know, inter and modal. But that was, and that led to everybody is intermodal now.
Right.
And with the containers, we started getting these steamship containers. We were set up with top lift.
Right.
How are you going to get a container on top of a circus flat car? What you have to do is put it on a trailer and then put the trailer on
Right.
a flat.
Wheels
Talk
on
about
wheels.
inefficiency.
Right.
What we did is we eliminated a flatbed trailer, had rubber tires, just put the box on the flat car.
Right.
Now they double stack them. We never double stacked ours. But
So-
anyway, it really worked well. We had, need to mention this, we were able to, we got on well with the operating chief, wonderful guy, Otto Zimmerman, dedicated 2 trains, overnight, Chicago, Memphis, 50 and 51, and they were fast. In fact, one woke me up one morning, we lived near the track. I thought it was an airplane on the ground, because he was a little bit tardy. And the crews, really, they paid attention. And the whole thrust was reliability. The truckers used it, and that was beginning to be a first. Now you've got J.B. Hunt, Schneider,
Right.
big users. I think Haverty started J.B. Hunt on intermodal, but we had Gordon's Transport. And I have one in the model collection, a piggyback trailer, and our son Gordon up there on the yellow trailer with Gordon's on it. And so when a trucker starts using piggyback, you know you've won the battle. And I'm really pleased with that. Think about today, they put 400 boxes on a train.
Right, right. And run trains 10,000, 12,000 feet long.
Yeah.
It's amazing. So how long were you in intermodal before you jumped ship to go to Amtrak?
It was a couple of years.
Okay.
But I turned Amtrak down 5 times. They were seeking me, the politicians. And they actually came to our house. That was Charlie Luna,
The Union
the
chief.
UTU
Yeah.
chief. But I turned them down 5 different times, and then finally said that I would agree because a member of the board, 4-star General Frank Besson, Besson, twisted my arm and couldn't say no, basically saying, the country needs you. And
So he guilted you into it.
4-star, here I am, senior first lieutenant long ago.
Yeah.
By then, I was in the reserves till 62, so I was in, but not at that time.
So had Roger Lewis retired at that point, or he was about to?
Well, that's a long story. They just put me in there.
Under him?
No, I reported to the board.
Okay.
I said, CEO, and that he could remain chairman of the board.
Okay.
And we provided him an office.
Yeah, non-executive chairman.
Yeah. A chairman, and this is free, today is done more often.
Yeah.
You just put the chairman out to pasture and have somebody else run it. But he was so nervous. He used to hide from the conductors on the train. He got special stop on and off at Rye, New York, and hide under the Wall Street Journal. He wasn't sleeping,
Yeah.
he's hiding. And scared to death, I think he thought the conductor's gonna bite. Well, they just wanted to talk.
Right.
They loved to talk to me. And they're not afraid of me. They don't bite. Anyway, he...
Well, he wasn't a railroad man. And
No, he clawed the furniture. I didn't want to spend any money, and we didn't have any money. But I had to replace this thing that he, in his office, he used to go sit by a coffee table. That was where he would greet his visitors and sit there, not over the desk, which is a good idea.
yeah.
But he had clawed absolutely, yeah. Talk about nervous. But we So he had a comfortable office, and he didn't do anything.
So who was really running the show then?
I was.
Well, before you got there, nobody.
It's leaderless, as far as I could tell. I don't even remember. They did have, some people, but they had a lot of cast-offs from other departments because they were government employees, like the post office. I had a bunch of them, and a number of other places. Unfortunately, not from the Department of Transportation, where they might know something about.
Yeah. So you parachute into this mess.
Yes.
And how do you prioritize? Because you can't do everything at once. How did you decide what to do and in what order?
Well, one thing was to try to make sure I got the proper management in place. And then the other was to get rid of the junk in the fleet. We inherited 1,000 museum pieces and a mixture of, we had steam heat. We don't have steam locomotives anymore. Why do we have steam heat? So we went, to the electric front. Some of the things I'm really pleased with is the technical stuff we did. We got the head-end power. We got it instead of a separate engine generator, which is what the Amtrak was trying to do. We had the new locomotives, the F-40s, had an alternator for the train behind the main alternator. So you had whatever its voltage was, and ours was 480. So it was a commercial voltage, because you go 120, 240, 480. So everything, back in the day, we had a 32-volt DC car next to a 64-volt DC car. And you couldn't train line them when one car went dead because they had batteries. They had batteries under every car, and that had to be regenerated. And then you even had a 110 volt. So what are you going to do with it when it's in the train? You got 20 cars, and you got this car with 110 volts in it. We called them a dog's breakfast.
Yeah.
It was just awful.
Yeah.
And a lot of them were nice cars. Now, a lot of them have been converted to head-end power, and they call it heritage.
Yeah.
So
Right.
But we did the first. We wanted to Amfleet the Night Owl, the overnight train, but it had to have a sleeper. So, and there was some rule about so many hours you had to have a sleeper. And anyway, that was the first conversion.
This is the Boston, Washington train.
Yeah, Boston, Washington, overnighter. And but we made a mistake. That's fascinating. Again, the technical stuff. It froze up because when you take the steam line out and then put in electric, you don't have a steam line there to keep the water pipes to go, even to the restroom. That water, the water source for the restroom and for drinking water froze up. That was interesting. You know what we did? Sent it to Miami on the next train to thaw out. There's no way we could do anything with it.
Yeah.
Just send it south.
Oh, boy.
But we learned,
So one of the thinkings that going on around 1970, early 70s, was with the railroads in the Northeast in dire financial straits and Amtrak being not financially viable, was talk about nationalization. And I'm anxious to get your views on that. I think it's people look at it and say, well, we'll just nationalize it like everyone else did in the world, and everything will be fine. That didn't happen. I think most people are probably glad it didn't happen. But what was your thinking at the time and about that?
Yeah, I gave it a lot of thought because I'd been to Europe and I enjoyed the British rail people. But, you know, that's not the way, in my opinion, they did have a wonderful train, a high-speed train, but, and they were moving toward higher speed. But I thought it would be better run as a private corporation. My first thought was to have it just subsidized. And that's basically what Amtrak is. In other words, but directly subsidize the freight railroads. But that really didn't work because John Reed didn't want to have anything to do with it. He didn't want a subsidy. He could run it better on his. So why do that? You know, I'll run it. And but then it leads to something because there was not an agreement in the AAR. We had all these different railroads to deal with, and like Lou Mank wouldn't even get along with the other board members. I used to attend the board meetings after Amtrak joined the AAR. And Lou Mank was like a llama up there. He was looking out the window and at the door and everything while somebody was talking. You know, another railroad chief who he didn't respect.
Yeah.
So there's really a lot of, and I was fascinated with the animosity within the AAR board of directors, not the staff, but the board. I don't know how the staff dealt with it.
So when you take over, you're going to go out and ride trains to see what's going on. And I think you did quite a bit of that. Can you just relate the experiences of what you found?
Yes, I was aimed to get to either 500 stations, and my aim was to, as part of my unannounced travel, which I really planned, was to at least step off and be on the ground at each station, say hi to the agent, and get back on. So I don't know how far along I was on that, but I did most of them. One night we stepped off at Sand Point, Idaho, I remember, and that was interesting. And another time, I think I about froze to the platform in the winter. It was so cold. I had on, you know, street shoes, not boots.
Right.
And boy, that was cold. But anyway, and say hi, and they appreciated it. And but they knew I cared, and they also knew that I expected them to do the job. And so I would do it over again, pretty much the same way. Yeah.
When I was with Accenture, we did a very large project on asset management. It was a technology, SAP and Maximo, two technologies that we were integrating for asset management, both physical assets of the track structure and the rolling assets. And so I spent a lot of time riding trains back and forth to different sites and so forth. And one thing that I noticed was the crews oftentimes were excellent and oftentimes weren't. And there didn't seem to be a consistency of discipline and training among the crews, right? You had all manner of people there. And, you know, unlike maybe in the military where there's a sort of a consistent level of discipline and training, it didn't seem to be prevalent. And when I was looking at my notes, it said that you found that there was a high level of inconsistency, and that was back in whatever it was, 1973 or 4 or something like that. And that doesn't seem to have changed a whole lot.
No, I gather that, you know, I don't ride it a lot. I do have probably the best pass for Tat and me as they call me a retired director. I did finally, because I told them I wanted to be CEO, not and report to the board. And but I had this, what's like a gold pass, good for a bedroom,
Yeah.
a cellar, everything. Those lounges, everything.
Nice. Well earned, right? Yeah, you went through the combat.
That's all. No retirement at all from them. I do have railroad retirement, but that's.
So the equipment's a mess, both the locomotives and the cars. You were able to get new cars when we were Lexington Group. I think it was you were telling me about the purchase of the Amfleet, the first Amfleet cars. Do you want to spend a few minutes on how that evolved?
Yes, well, the Amfleet is basically designed, it's a Metroliner without motors. It's a Bud company built them. They still were tooled up for that body. And it is indestructible. We did have one that was cornered one time in a yard, and so I saw the interior of it. There was no corrosion at all, just a little dust. And it was like new. They were stainless steel, built by the Bud company, and so they were so good. Then we had a good price, and it was going up. We had an option, $333,000 a piece. Today you would pay millions per car.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about, 2-3 million per car. 333,000. So we had this pot of money, and we divided the 333 into the pot of money, and came up with 492 cars. And that's how many Amfleet. And they're still running.
They are, yes.
492. That's what we. And in my garage, and you're welcome to photograph it, is a thing from the Bud company. It says from the guys in the shop from the Bud company. And then they shut down.
Yeah.
If we hadn't done that, there wouldn't have been any more. It's sort of like, I don't know if you know this, but the St. Louis car, after they did the Highliners for us, which are the gallery cars, electrified, for the Illinois Central, they shut down. So now everybody's foreign.
Yeah, right. So that helped take care of mainly the coach side of the house, but you had sleeping cars, diners, and head-end cars that were also pretty old.
Yes, well, we I'm laughing because McDivitt, the astronaut, became Pullman president. And I signed a contract for the Superliners. And basically tried to the El Capitan cars on the Santa Fe.
The double deck.
That was a full double deck. And at any rate, he's standing by. You have to, when you build a passenger car, it has to go through, I call it a squeeze test, for strength of in case of a derailment. Mm-hmm. Basically, with like a rear end collision type thing. But anyway, they put his brand new car in the squeezer, and he's standing there, and he told me that he's I've been on the moon, but I'm never so scared in my life as when my car began to creak and crunch, but it survived. It, passed the test.
Yeah.
But I think he was fun. I've had a lot of them. like I knew Rohr, the head of the jet, they did the nacelles, a jet engine. And they ended up building all these metro cars. There's some of them are still running, the 1000s on metro.
And in the Northeast Corridor, of course, you're running ancient electrics until you got the ability to acquire new power.
Yeah.
And most of that, I think, was you started trying to use the E60s, freight engines in passenger service.
Yeah, well, that was before I got there.
Okay.
We really hoped we could save the GG1s, but they had some chemical
Asbestos or something.
there was something like that, but it's oily thing
Oh.
that was leaking out. So they had to dig up around the engine house after they left. That's why the GG1s were retired. So the thought was and I actually ran one on the test track. It's a black Mesa and Lake Powell, and the engine has BLM on the side of it. And a great electric locomotive. I'd never run with the automatic air before. I was able to look out and stop that. They had inspection car behind it, stop with automatic air right at the platform. A great locomotive. However, it didn't like the track. And that's this, I'll tell you. Where is it? Yes.
This, my friend here.
Yes, yes. This is the track. 140-pound rail, Northeast Corridor, that high. And that, I went out to the side of the derailment. It derailed at about 100 miles an hour. Really, nobody hurt. That thing had been on both sides of that rail. The pair of wheels had jumped like this one and jumped all the way over on the other side. And I said, no more.
Know what caused that? Some kind
Best we could tell, it was the
of rocking?
traction motors. They
Oh.
were so powerful they were running out from under the locomotive. We tried to stop it, putting a pad, like a stopper for the truck, and then that got worn, and we even put, like Teflon in an old frying pan, and changed that. That didn't work because it got sort of rigid like your finger. And then we went to something called Rulon, which is, I guess, an improved Teflon. And that didn't work either, so we're going to get rid of them. And so we've been looking around the world, and I had, knew that the Swedes had this nice little locomotive, and I couldn't believe how wonderful it was. I'm riding in the cab. There's a water cooler, and the water isn't really even moving. We're going around curves and up and down grades. And I said, this thing's going to be right at home in the United States. And that's now they called it the Mighty Mouse. ASEA, which in Swedish is their General Electric, built them. And then they made a deal with EMD to have it by America built here, but it's basically, and it's thyristor controlled. What that means is you've got separate excitation of the field and the armature, which was brand new at the time. It really worked well. Smooth starts, and those things are, 7 means 7,000 horsepower.
This is the AEM7.
AEM7. A for ASEA, EM for electromotive, and 7 the horsepower. And there were 52 of them we got. And I guess they're now all retired, but they were wonderful. You could run 2 of them on a train if need be, like the Southern Crescent. But one could handle beautifully what became, replace the Metro line. Haul it with Amfleet and an engine. And
Curious that they didn't try and replace it with a more modern version of Mighty Mouse rather than going away from it entirely.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's a government mentality, I think. We did try a French locomotive. They wanted in on it, as did the Germans. Well, once the French locomotive derailed coming out of Wilmington shop, we had to oil the track, the top of the rail, so that it didn't like it here at all.
Yeah.
So it went home. We also had, and this is kind of a fun story, in England, they wanted us to buy the high-speed train, HST.
The articulated one?
Yeah. So Schmidt, we call him Herr Schmidt, a very good, but a Naval Academy graduate, was our mechanical guy. And so Herr Schmidt is over there, and they invited him to ride on the footplate. And I wondered why in the world he was, I was there, he was, looked like he was scared to death. And he didn't want to do it. He thought he was going to ride on the footboard out in front like on a switch locomotive. And I could just picture him out there with tears coming out of his eyes.
And bugs in his
And
teeth.
he didn't want to ride because in Brit name it's a footplate because it's steam. They did not sit. The driver, they call him, a locomotive engineer,
Right. Stands.
stood.
Yeah.
And so it's a footplate.
Yeah.
It's on the left side. So anyway, I thought that was.
He was probably relieved. So on the diesel side, there was an experiment with the 6-axle SDP-40.
SDP-40F.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that wasn't
thing
a happy-
didn't like really anything except the Santa Fe. John Reed said, I don't have any trouble with it. He says it's these people's track. Well, we were trying to run it, on people's track, like the L&N. That was one of the worst, the old Louisville and Nashville. Because the Floridian, you really needed a big locomotive because it was a long train. And at one time had some auto carriers on it, a combined auto train passenger. So that thing, thinking again is, how we'll rebuild them. We ended up trading them in, but they did use the prime mover and the traction motor. Of course, you ended up with an extra traction motor. But, well, first we took out the center traction motor. We did
Really?
some testing to see if we could make it stay on the track. That didn't work. So we traded them in, and that became the F40 PHR. And that means F40 is the horsepower, 4,000. And P passenger, H for head end power, and then the R, some people think it's for my name. I am PHR. But the R is for long range.
Okay.
Bigger fuel tank.
Okay.
Otherwise, how are you going to run across the Empire Builder? So those have the first ones were built as F40s, and everything else was. There were I think 30 of them. They were started on the San Diegans. Wonderful locomotive. So I thought, let's get more of those.
The SDP-40 was not an uncommon locomotive, right? It was like an SD-40 with
Well, that's it, and that's why the feds wanted that. Good point. They wanted all of these to be freight locomotives so they could get rid of them when Amtrak 2-year experiment goes away, so we don't have it anymore. The whole intent of US DOT was to get rid of passenger, to save, and it started with the Penn Central. They figured that if they could get rid of passenger, it would save the Pennsylvania Railroad. And then later, it even got worse when they merged.
Right. So how was your relationship? Because you ultimately own, as Amtrak, the Northeast Corridor, but you're running over other people's track everywhere else. And obviously you had to maintain relationships with all these other Class I carriers. How did you do that? How was it? Who was good? Who was a pain in the neck?
Well, it got better because, I tried to really work on that. I decided early on, because it's their railroad, and we had by law rights to use it, and at avoidable cost, not full cost, and we had priority. And they didn't like especially the priority. And so I invited myself to visit each of the CEOs. I didn't call them, to come to Washington to see me. I went there and sat in their office, including the MOP, Missouri Pacific, all of them, every single one of them. And there's not really a lot they could say, other than we're going to tolerate you. I got along with all of them. There were some of them sort of stiff-necked, like that Southern Pacific bunch, was it Biagini?
Yeah.
He replaced Russell, who was reasonable, but Biagini was a hard neck. Ben, wasn't it? Ben Biagini?
Yep, that's right. So you're dealing with not only their operational issues, but track conditions that may not be up to running, high speed or semi-high speed.
True, and they were required by law to maintain the same level of utility as when Amtrak was formed. And so there were battles on that, including with my former railroad, Illinois Central. And we won a big lawsuit with them because they just stopped maintaining the track. They didn't need that passenger line, they had a freight line, and north-south. But at any rate, and I said to them, we had lots of meetings internally, and I said, we don't want the money, fix the track. So they did, down toward Champaign. Because I have a photo riding the city of Miami, speed recorder 113. We had beautiful track when I was there.
Yeah.
And we got it back by they totally rebuilt that track.
And you tried some new marketing techniques, including linking bus schedules to passenger schedules and that sort of thing. Can you talk a little bit about some of the ideas and what worked and what didn't?
Yeah, well, we really wanted to develop feeder bus and cooperative arrangements. In fact, I visited with the head of Greyhound. I'm trying to remember his name, but that didn't work out too well.
No.
Didn't want to have anything to do with us. But now they do have, Amtrak has good through routes, and I think the idea was good, it just didn't work.
So Auto Train became a major contributor, still is, to Amtrak. And I don't recall when Garfield started Auto Train as a separate enterprise. I don't recall what year that was. Were you at Amtrak at the time when the first Auto Train began?
No, I actually, when it's the very, very beginning of it, USDOT did a study on hauling people's automobiles on the train, and the idea at first was to have people ride in their automobile, but sitting on a flat car, and that was tested. But in a baggage car, because we weren't going to have anybody ride out on a flat car. And my marketing guy, Dave Watts, rode in a car inside a horse car. The old baggage car,
yeah, right.
Not all of them, but some of them were designated horse cars. They had indoors for racehorses.
Yeah, and scenery and things like that. Well,
yes, we used it for theater scenery. Yeah. And anyway, he's in this thing, and he kept cinching his belt. He's still alive, tighter and tighter and tighter. And but there was no way, it was jiggling and it was terrible. It's because you had the rail springs and then you had the automotive springs. And see, what you really needed to do was tie the automobile down and then jump around. Because the track's not perfect.
Yeah. Well, I can imagine if you needed restroom or food.
That led, we then decided we're going to do it. We had, for some reason, Volkswagen was using the auto rack and stopped using it. So we had a couple of auto racks, and we put them on trains 9 and 10. The secondary called the Chicago and the Washington Express. And we sold it this way. We'll ride with us. The ticket, your car will be in ahead of you. Train 9 gets in. Ride the Capital Limited. By the time you get off the cap, we called it, and it walked out, your car will be there because we'll wash it. We had to wash it. The test we did on that, that's funny too. We rented Hertz cars instead of using. So here they get this car with 5 miles on the speedometer, and it's been gone for 2 days, all dripping, clean washed. So I don't know that they ever knew
what you were
it
doing.
Had been ridden, had gone on a train. So anyway.
Well, they've managed to keep Auto Train running, I think successfully. It's one of their biggest contributors now.
Yes, and Gene Garfield took that idea and ran with it and did it properly and did outstanding onboard service. I mean, just great.
Oh, really?
He would measure with a little ruler the placement of the glasses to make, because the crew, not too close to the edge of the table. He was a stickler for detail.
Oh, really? Yeah.
And Tat and I were invited to ride on it without car. That you didn't do that.
Yeah.
So we went through all that hospitality and rode it to Fuller, down from Lorton and then to Sanford, Florida.
So you're at Amtrak for 3 years, roughly?
Almost 4.
Almost 4.
And I had agreed to do 3.
What decided you to depart? What was the...
I didn't want to be in the passenger.
For someone who spent a good part of his career?
Too young.
Too young. That's good.
And so that's how I ended up. But I've had a lot of fun.
So the Northeast Corridor Improvement Project was a big deal, right, to try and revamp ancient infrastructure. It got part of the way there. There's sort of hope, I
Yeah,
guess,
well,
it'll get the
it
rest
was
of it.
very important, and part of the technical part that was the concrete ties. For the railroad industry didn't like concrete ties. The only one that I know of that used them was the
Florida East Coast.
Florida
doing it.
East Coast, lightweight trains, high speed. At any rate, the theory was they wouldn't stand up under the axle loading. And but we put in stretches of concrete tie, and we had to change. There was a pad under the tie plate to the tie, and we had to change several times that pad. I think we ended up with what's called neoprene.
Okay, like
It's
a
like
rubber.
a pad, but it's, yeah, flex. And now they have to replace those things, but they work. And you got that rail is going, the vibration is going to create hairline cracks under that seat of the plate on the tie.
So ultimately, there was expansion of the electrified zone from New Haven to Boston.
Yeah.
Very expensive proposition, wasn't very popular in the communities near where I live in Connecticut. Was that and that was after your time there?
No, but I wanted to do it.
You did?
Yeah. And we wanted to, we didn't want to have that rigid type catenary that is on this end as old as I am.
Right, yeah,
And,
older.
but it's it is in the new, it's called constant tension.
Right,
There
has
are
the weights, counterweights.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's European.
Yeah, yeah, and I think,
And then we went, instead of that accordion-like thing, we went to the Favely
pantograph.
single-arm pantograph.
Right.
So all of that technical stuff, and it works.
Yeah, works fine.
But my point, the bottom line for younger people is, use the latest proven technology.
Right.
And test it and adjust, but don't try to invent something new.
So in the, I guess, sophomoric approach to passenger rail is, gee, they do all this really cool stuff in Europe, we should do it here, we're like a third world country. And I think I said sophomoric, not recognizing that Europe is, the density and distances are a lot different from here.
And the freight business.
And the freight business is-
Totally. They have wagons.
Yeah,
Some of
two
them
axle
still.
still.
4-wheel.
Right. And with the
Unbelievable.
things like the TGV, they built separate infrastructure for a lot of it.
Yeah.
So what do you think about high-speed rail here? And I mean, I don't think you can make the case that a transcontinental network makes sense, but you can make the case in corridors like San Francisco to LA and Richmond, say, to Boston. How do you view the future of
No, I
high-speed
think
rail?
in segments, and but the problem is, running between electric and diesel. But there is a locomotive now that I haven't seen it, but in fact, I think it's supposed to be triple powered.
Oh, really?
We've had for some time third rail shoe for the tunnels around New York,
Mm-hmm. Right.
and that's DC.
Yeah.
And then the pantograph.
Yeah,
But-
the New Haven had those in the late 50s, early 60s,
Yeah.
the dual-powered locomotives.
yeah, and then they had some fires
Yeah,
with that.
right.
But so it's tricky stuff. The third rail shoe
Right,
fire.
yeah, they knock them off. And,
But metros had fires with theirs. They have trash. People throw papers down,
Right. and I think your view is that integrated or articulated train sets like the Acela, although not probably a seller, but that model is probably the way to go, the way they do in Europe with the
Yes.
AGV and the ice train.
I agree. Yeah, rather than locomotive haul.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just not, you know, we couldn't really afford that. That was, yeah. But now they're great, and they tilt. They sell to tilt.
Right. Which east of New Haven is really helpful because the serpentine route along the shore there. So the economics of running passenger trains seem to elude the people in Washington who are providing the money, right? There's always been this, I've called it the fare box model, where, you know, I take in this much revenue, I sell you a ticket for $100 and it costs me $200 to move you from origin to destination, therefore I'm going to lose money on everyone, and it doesn't make sense. And I think I'm going to send you a piece about a different economic model that takes into account the value of not only if you ride the train, are you not in a car causing congestion and air pollution and burning up fuel, so there's a social benefit, which I think the Europeans take into account as a part of their business model for funding high-speed rail that we don't do here, right? It's a constant battle to get sufficient funding for Amtrak. Although the current administration seems to have a plan to actually give them some real money.
Yeah, well, it's quite different because the U.S. president rode Amtrak every day when he was in the Senate. And he's still in Delaware a lot of nights. So up and down, you know, and so, and then the today's president of Amtrak was a staffer, but he actually was there because of Biden. So it's very friendly. And then you got both houses of the same party. Totally different from in my day when, you know, you had the Senate one party, the House the other, and Department of Transportation. Hated everybody.
I was telling Julie at breakfast that Dave Hughes, who served as president of Amtrak for a period of time, he and I had worked together at the B&M, and we were having lunch in Union Station, and we walked down the hall to his office, and we walked by two other offices, and he said, in any railroad, that would be the VP of Operations and the VP of Marketing. Here it's the VP of Government Affairs. And so the relationships with Capitol Hill have always been a bit stressed. And I think the other thing was that the board members of Amtrak really were not railroad people, they were political appointments. So you didn't have an informed board. Do you see that as, how did you deal with the Hill, and was the board helpful, or would it have been more helpful to have somebody as a professional railroader on it?
My concept is that the chairman ought to handle the Hill, the politics, both parties, and the White House. And the CEO run the railroad. I don't think you should do both.
Commingle, right.
Unless you're a Blessing Graham Claytor, having been
government official
and a qualified locomotive engineer. But you don't get that all the time. I think I got along fairly well with the Hill, but I think I scared them because they didn't understand, you know, the technology of it. And we had, you know, like there were two senators from Indiana. One was Birch Bayh, and the other was Bott. That was Vance Hartke. So you had that type of thing. And then you had some wonderful people, like Skubitz from Kansas. He kind of talked like this. He would point to, from his podium, said, if you, pointing at it, think I'm going to support your northeast corridor and not have a train running through Kansas, you've got another think coming. And he got up and left. The hearing, the end of hearing. The Department of Transportation sitting there, you know, are all at these tables,
Right.
speechless. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
He had the purse strings. I think he at that time was appropriations. So you have authorization. That's a hunting license. And then when you actually get to load the weapon and fire, that's called appropriation.
Yeah. So you're hunting with no ammunition.
Right. That's appropriation. And that's all talk. That, you know, when they talk about Congress doing this and that, just talk. Even in the law, it doesn't mean anything till it's appropriated.
There was a period of time where you went through budget cuts, and the ICC held hearings about Amtrak service that I think you felt were a disservice to the company. Can you comment on that a little bit?
Yes, well, they were supposed to, they were on the way out, the ICC,
Yeah.
because of deregulation. And they were supposed to control our quality of service. And that would include, you know, and they did help us on the track issue, the level of utility. We've been through that. But the quality of service included, you know, dining car, sleepers. They wouldn't let us take a sleeper off. And you might have, like Detroit to Cincinnati, one person.
Yeah. Right.
And I was on there one night when there was just, I was Pass and one other person. And I said, you know, and the porter said, "It's going to get better, boss." You know, I said, you know, I think, you know, people are either flying or driving. We've got a problem.
Yeah.
You know, I tried to explain it to them.
Yeah.
They either want their car, they don't want to sleep on a train, on a trip like that.
There's some places where it works. You get on in Boston and you sleep on the train. You get off in Washington and go to work, and you've saved a hotel night. And you know, you can do that going maybe to New York to Chicago. But
very limited.
yeah, right. You're not going to fill a train with that. So the ICC hearings, I think, you know, were characterized as basically handling complaints and not helping the revenue side of the picture.
Yes.
And you tried to get them to stop and couldn't, which had to be frustrating.
No. But we lived with it. They're doing their job.
So when Ford became president, he's cutting the budget, and you're stuck with not near enough money to run things.
Right.
How do you do that when you can't take off a train that goes through West Virginia because the congressmen in West Virginia say, we have to have this?
It's very difficult. But I liked Jerry Ford. In fact, he knew who I was. We were some gala somewhere. Tat and I were there. And I said, "I'm Paul Reistrup, president of Amtrak." He said, "I read about you in the paper today." So, and he was a very nice guy. And then I rode with him once. That's kind of fun.
Oh, did you? On the campaign?
Yeah, campaign train, and I remember it was Joliet, Illinois. And it had a brick platform, and I knew it. And I said, "You really got to make sure that those bricks are even. If it's one's up, take it up and get the sand out of there," because he tended to stumble. And the reason was, he is so people oriented. He's looking and gazing around,
Not paying
and
attention
not
to
paying
his footwork.
attention to where he's going.
Yeah. So you get to the end of the time at Amtrak. Did you feel like you'd made a lot of progress? And what didn't you get done that you wanted to get done?
Well, I would say that when I left, I had stayed as long as I committed, and did really everything I could do. And there were a few unaccomplished things. Mainly, I would say the what I called mini corridors. We had tried them on the Illinois Central, Chicago, Champaign, and but I wanted to do it with Amtrak, like a spoke around Chicago. For instance, as far as you could get up toward Minneapolis. I didn't think you could go to Minneapolis. Certainly could do, Milwaukee. Turn the corner, maybe to Madison, the capital, that type of thing. But certainly Detroit, Chicago, Detroit. Those are natural.
Yep, right. Short enough.
Yeah, and I call them mini corridors.
Yeah.
And we didn't get to complete that. And do that where trains were not running. And Amtrak is trying to do some of that, like to Columbus, Ohio. I don't think Columbus has any passenger now.
I don't think so. So, what's your thinking when you leave? What do you think you want to do after that? Because you're not old enough to go out to pasture.
Get back in the freight business. And I ended up consulting with Parsons Brinkerhoff, but I did do some railroading there. I privatized 2 railroads in Argentina.
So was that immediately after Amtrak, or close?
Well, let's see, close.
Yeah.
Yeah, because first I went after it with Bob Banks, and that led, because he is, was basically an economic consultant and did a lot of government work. He had been a Civil Aeronautics Board, so he had a government oriented. But at any rate, I was number 2 and basically the technical engineering guy. I'm succeeded by a 2-star Corps of Engineer General. He's still there, Ken Wither.
And how long were you with R.L. Banks?
10 years.
10 years.
But then I did all of these, and it led to the Argentina too.
With Henry
Posner.
Posner.
Yeah, with Posner.
Okay. And then, and that was pretty arduous, I guess, because it's a long way and it's pretty primitive conditions compared to what you're used to, right?
Yes, and the railroads were government-owned and overstaffed. I mean, there was a small army. They called a yard is called a patio, like a patio, a patio. So the F.A. de Patio is a yard master. So I taught rules. What basically I did there was with computerized dispatching that we did with the Monongahela Railway. No signals. You could add signals in if you wanted to, but you did it all by the blocks, by computer. And I taught them down there in my pidgin Spanish. And I had to pass my rules exam. Via Libre, that's a clear block. Verde, green signal. They knew.
Yeah.
And we never had any kind of accident. But you had to have that block control because they were used to telephones and waving flags and all this stuff.
What kind of condition were those operations physically, the track and?
That's fascinating because it varied. The wide gauge, 5-foot gauge, built by the Brits, Buenos Aires, E Pacifico, BAP, BOP, rickety. But the meter gauge was in much better shape, a real railroad. And so, but they had different management. And I got on really very well with it was called the Urquiza. They were named after generals. The general, very military. So that helped, my being ex-military.
So you got involved with something I'm not conversant with on passenger rail called Ameristar Rail.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
That is a good friend, Scott Spencer, and he's got a lot of bright ideas, and it is, you know, still in a fledgling type thing, but I'm trying to help him.
And can you explain for those watching this what his proposition is?
The idea is to operate actually like a feeder airline with trains, like, you know, United Express and all of them, Delta Express, all of them, and have this be instead of Amtrak Express be, use Amtrak crews and Amtrak paint color, but have an operation be, but, you know, semi-privatized.
So how would it work, say, in the Northeast? If you could give an example, maybe.
Well, an example would be running out to Harrisburg, you know, through service instead of having to change trains.
And so this...
And also to New York City. And the concept was to have multiple powered locomotives so you could get off the Northeast Corridor and through those tunnels and go beyond. Our concept is to go out on the Long Island.
Okay. So how is that different from what Amtrak's doing now? Because they run a Harrisburg, New York service, for example.
Yeah, well, they don't go a single line out onto Long Island.
No, they don't.
Yeah, that's a big difference.
Okay. So it's feeding the core, the stem,
yes,
from a series of branch operations.
Yes. The closest Long Island is coming to now is that new tunnel getting into Grand Central. So
right.
But that's expensive, billions.
Yeah, and that's been, I worked in operations planning at Penn Central in the 70s, and there was talk of Long Island entry into Grand Central then. So it's taken a long, long time to get there. So he has this concept of through running. Maybe you could explain for our viewers what that involves.
Well, it's so that you stay in the same seat and go, you know, to more places.
So I could go Harrisburg to Massapequa.
Yeah, you don't have to change train. Another example is we just had our friends departed from the speech
right.
Saturday night. They had to change in Penn Station to go up the Hudson River.
Right, right. So this
do think that it's a cross platform if you're lucky.
Right. Have you seen the new facility that they put in there, the new Penn Station?
Moynihan? Yeah. Not yet.
It looks, the pictures make it look good. So.
No, but you know, we may be able to see. We've got the pass.
Right, right. Yeah, well, it's the photos make it look beautiful. It was such a crime they tore down Penn Station and put up that god-awful Madison Square Garden
this was
structure.
The building was a twin to the old Penn Station.
Yeah, right.
And it's named for Moynihan.
Yeah.
Another great rail supporter.
So what do you think in terms of the future of passenger rail in the U.S.? How do we get there? Is it something where it's state supported as well as federal supported? Is it all federal? Is it all state? You know, the California corridor between LA and San Francisco, for example, is a major undertaking. It seems to be inching along. These things seem to take forever, but what do you see as the roadmap to getting to the future?
I think a partnership, and it's sort of along the idea of the Ameristar. In other words, partners with the states, and it maybe extend beyond their limits, you know, go over the border. That's where Amtrak can help.
Yeah.
Because we know that that California corridor is a natural if they can get it done.
Right.
Because you got the people forget the topography. See, they fly over it and they don't realize there's a mountain down there.
Right. Looks easier from up at 33,000 feet.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I don't know if there's anything you want to add. I don't have any more questions.
No, it's been
here.
fun. And last night was fun. The prep meeting.